Hey, Jack.
Hey, Trevor, how are you?
I'm doing great. Welcome back to another episode of Hey, Jack, Leadership Reflections with Jack Nalig. I'm Trevor Robinson here with the one and only Jack Nalig. Jack, we took a little bit of a break there for a couple weeks. Lots been going on here in our world, but I want to touch on something really quickly before we dive into today's episode. I saw a pretty awesome post on LinkedIn. Bunch of kids shouting, "Hey, Jack," or something. What's going on there? Because I'm not the only one who saw that post, and I loved it.
Yeah. So I was fortunate and was humbled, I guess, to speak to a whole bunch of Pennsylvania juniors and seniors that are attending something called PFEW, which is Pennsylvania Free Enterprise Week. And it's actually a series of 4 weeks because there's so many kids. And it's juniors and seniors from every county in the state, I think every high school in the state. And they go, and it's basically business summer camp, if you will, for a week. And they take them to like Coleman College and Penn College, and they have a week of learning about what business is. And they do it through a computer simulation, and they organize them into teams, and they run a company. Each team is a company.
Oh, nice.
So they get a real hands-on experience of what it's like to run a business. So they asked me, and there's others, to be one of their keynote speakers for a week. So I keynoted week 3 and spoke a little bit about leadership. So, of course, you know me. Then I thought that was taking Hey Jack on the road, and that's why I did the post.
I love it. And it's really good to see that as well. I think that's one of the things, at least whenever I was in high school, we didn't really get anything taught about leadership. And It's one of those topics that we started to scrape the surface in college, and then not until I got into the real world where it's like you took a lot of the book knowledge and got real practical advice. So I love that, you're able to go on the road, inspire some of those students, hopefully.
Yeah.
And hopefully we picked up a couple more listeners here on the podcast.
I think we did. Although when I said, of course, you need to look me up on LinkedIn, I think about a third of them nodded. The other 2/3 were like, "Oh, I got to get on LinkedIn now."
You lost them there.
Yeah, but that's where they got to go. And I was hoping the one thought I left them is what you were basically saying, and that is that there's their vocational skills that they're going to pursue, but leadership is a separate skill, and they have to do that in a separate track, if you will. So,
okay,
if they learn that, then that's a good thing.
Yeah, and we'll have to take this podcast over to TikTok if we're trying to reach that audience. I don't know if many of them know about LinkedIn.
Or Instagram, right? Or
Instagram, yeah. But yeah, we took a couple weeks off to, recharge and rejuvenate here, and we're back now. I guess you could technically call this season 2. We got a lot of fun things planned here. I know that we've got some good guests coming up that we've got scheduled here. A lot of really interesting topics here as well. And I think we're coming into one here with our flow of the podcast. Now, if you are just tuning in, this is the first time that you're listening to us, or even if you've been a listener for a while, the last episode that we put out was essentially kind of like a best of highlight video from those first 10 episodes. It was a glimpse of some of the key takeaways. Any comments on that, Jack?
When I thought about it and sat back and watched our highlight video and thought about the messages we've been leaving, I think we really hit what we were trying to achieve, which was just practical advice on leadership, right? Not, big theoretical or big aha moment leadership, but really just leadership advice that could help leaders be better every day. And I think we really nailed it. I think the conversations were at the right level, what we wanted to accomplish, and the feedback's been great. And it's just motivating for me, and I know it's motivating for you to continue, because it looks like there's a vein of people that like to hear those kinds of stories and that kind of information.
Yeah, and I think you hit it there. It's at that level, I think, that is it's what people need in the moment, and it's not overwhelming, but it's very practical. And just when I was, kind of going back through and listening as well, it was good to get that reminder on some of those things.
Yeah.
And leadership has so many different, branches and variables that, we'll start covering a lot more of those here, in these next episodes here in this, season 2, as we'll call it.
Yeah.
One topic today, though, I want to talk a little bit about, which is one that we don't normally think about when it comes to leadership, but that is being a visionary and leadership. And how do you think about that, Jack, when it comes to being a leader, visionary, tie all that together?
Yeah. So I think it's a great topic too, but one that is a little bit fuzzy because as a practical leadership topic for middle management type leaders, it may not be much to them. They may not feel like they're part of the visionary cycle in their company, and they may not know what they're supposed to be doing in visionary ways. But on the other side, we all live our lives and see these super successful visionaries as examples in front of us every day. If you think about Elon Musk, a great visionary, right? Jeff Bezos with Amazon, a phenomenal visionary. And, Zuckerberg and all the rest of them. This is a country chock full of visionaries, quite frankly. And I thought about what the formula was for that, and I think it's two things. One, our country has a massive and very effective and very rich educational system throughout the colleges, and they all have these research elements to them, and they work really great with industry. We have this very mature and active educational system that's creating visionaries. And then the second thing that I think goes along with it is our country is full of private equity investors, right? The money is trying to make more money. And they're just funding the crap out of all these young visionaries. And it's that system of the funding and the educational growth of our students that's sort of a hotbed, makes us a hotbed of visionary talent, if you will. So that's the way I think we should think about visionary. And then you say, well, but Jack, this practical advice stuff, I'm a manager of accounting in a company. Why do I need to think about visionary? And I think I would share this reflection. First of all, let's define visionary in more of a practical way. And I think I would define it as a visionary in a company is someone who simply sees the future and then has the skills and talents to take people there, right? So that second part is what you and I are teaching, right? The skills and talents to be a good leader, to bring people along with you where you want to go. But the question mark should be in people's mind is, what level of visionary should I be? What do I have to do in a visionary way? So to carve that up a little bit, if you're in top management, the general manager, the president, the CEO, and you have an executive staff of some sort, and maybe even their staff, the top 10 or 20 leaders, that group of leaders is truly accountable for visionary thinking. They need to propel the business forward. They need to create the visions which will then drive the strategies and the tactics and the actions, right? So there is a small group at the top of most companies that need to be visionaries. But I would argue everybody else in leadership in that company, more operational leaders, they don't need to be a visionary. But what they do need to do is see the vision of their function. So again, accounting manager and R&D manager, if you think about it, all of those roles in our companies have transformed over the years, usually by having an injection of technological change hit them, right? And you could do it in product technology if you're a design engineering manager, or you could do it in the tools that you have to do 3D modeling, right? There's things that are changing at all times in your function. And it's your job to see at least the next step and the next step of what's coming at you so that you bring those technologies in, you articulate change to your team, and you at least change your function for the future. So even though visionary maybe feels like a big word to most leaders and managers, I want them to think about it as, wait a minute, maybe the small V in visionary, not the big V. Maybe I should be a visionary for my function, or if I'm part of a team of people in a group or a bigger function, maybe we should think about how to transform our function for the better of the company, right? So it's that way I think we should think about leadership, visionary leadership. And then the other thing that hit me was, the next thing you would say as one of those leaders is, well, then what do I do? Like, how do I become a little more visionary than I am today? And I'd say there's two things to think about there. One, most good visionary thinking comes from typically off-site workshops, right? The top level management will do this once a year, or hopefully once a year, but sometimes only once every 2 years or 3 years. They'll go on a big retreat for 2 or 3 days with some outside consultants to walk them through a process to create a new vision, or to check their vision and adapt their vision. Okay, so if the top level leaders are doing that, there's nothing preventing the lower level leaders from doing the same thing. Maybe not in a 3-day offsite with consultants, but you could have a 1-day on-site or off-site with your team or maybe your peers' team get together to let your people all give you feedback on the future, what they see about their function. So I think everybody should think of themselves as a little visionary and be able to drive the process on an annual basis to think bigger. The second thing that everybody should think about is, I said it's about seeing the future and having the skills to take people there. Well, that's clearly an every year planning exercise. It should be strategic planning for every function and the company, right? Not necessarily visionary planning. You may look at the vision of the company, but each year you need to develop new strategies to adapt that vision and make the vision stronger, right? Yeah. And an annual strategic planning exercise by function, I think, is also very, very critical. So those are the two ways I think people can maybe bring visionary thinking to life in their function. And I think the story of today is, no, you and I are not trying to teach people to be Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk. And we're not saying we know how private equity drives innovation and creates companies. That's not what we do. But what I hope people take away from today is that the word visionary is very critical, because you'd rather have people looking for the future than not, right? Rather have your bosses with their high beams on, not their low beams, so that we see danger coming or we see opportunity coming and we start taking advantage of it earlier than our competitors. Yeah. So those are my rough random feelings, Trevor, on being a visionary. And the other thing I thought we could get a little bit of a dialogue in here is, as you know, my career has all been sort of operational leadership, right? And I was in a bigger publicly traded company, then a pretty big privately held company, got to run big teams, little teams. But one thing I've never done is I've never been an entrepreneur and started up a business. And I feel in a strange way, not a strange way, but probably in a very important way, that if you're an entrepreneur, you need to first and foremost be some form of a visionary. Because if you're starting a company, you better have a vision, or it may just peter out really quick, Yes. So maybe now I know you are an entrepreneur and you've started a business or two, even one with your daughter one time, if I recall.
Yes, that's correct.
So maybe you could reflect on being a visionary as an entrepreneur for everybody, and and I'm hoping it's a little different than me as a visionary inside of an operational company.
Yeah, sure. I think you nailed it there with the operational side. And I think before I dive into, how I kind of view this, I want to really make sure that I get the point across that I built my visionary skill set, I'll call it a skill set, through the leaders within the organizations that I worked in, largely just one organization. And that was because they fostered this visionary mindset and a culture. And so as a leader, I would encourage you to know the impact that you can actually have on the company, not only yourself by doing these things that you reference, but also as being a leader to a team that you work with as well. Because if you can foster that environment, that's going to allow the team that you work with to also have that visionary confidence, is what I would say.
Yeah.
From the entrepreneurial side, the way I kind of look at visionary is I try to think of things that don't exist in the market, or things that do exist in the market that I think can be done in a more efficient way. Mm-hmm. The downside to that is that you are battling this two-sided monster where it's great to be a visionary, but you could sit around doing nothing all day just thinking of the next greatest and then you become this professional thinker. You have to attach the doing with it, right? And that's the hard part. And so when I think of being a visionary and entrepreneurship, or even how other people can do this, like being a visionary at the smallest level can be you starting to post content on LinkedIn and you're adding your own twist or your style to it. Maybe you have a font that you really like or an approach that you do for an intro. Like that, you're becoming a visionary on how you create and shape content. So that's at like the smallest level, right? Yeah. But then if you go a couple layers up, I first off, I look at things, and it's just like in business in general, you have to look at all the data that you have. And it does come back to a leadership principle, which is communication, which we talked about. And communication is a two-way street where it's you actively communicating with others, seeking, and then also being an active listener. And when you think of entrepreneurship, a lot of people think that there's a lot of risk associated with it. I actually think it's not as risky as some may think, as long as you validate the vision that you have and you talk to people and you think about those second order consequences. What could go wrong? What are the hurdles I'm going to face? And then you have to be convicted that the vision that you have is going to be greater than those challenges and those risks that you have. Yeah. Right. But at the end of the day, the way I try to think about it is like, it's never a perfect world. You're always having your own challenges. For me, the number one skill that I've found is being able to communicate the vision that you have. Because if you can't communicate that vision properly, then nothing is going to get accomplished. Yeah. And you alluded, I actually did start a business with at the time, she was a 3-year-old. We built, I basically let her pick a business. And I wanted to teach her business. And some of you might have heard this story before, but I let her pick the business, let her pick the name, the colorway, the marketing, and everything. She picked a house cleaning company. We became one of the top ones in our local area within a year. And she was the boss. She ran the marketing, she ran everything. But my vision there, I still had a vision within that, which was I looked at something. In that case, it was a house cleaning business, a home service business. And I looked at this and I said, well, this is done inefficiently. So that checks that first box there, which I mentioned, which is, can I improve something, right? It doesn't have to be I'm sending rockets to space. So for me, it was like, okay, well, what am I going to do better where there's an inefficiency in the market? That it's going to give us a great advantage and opportunity. And so that was digital marketing. I kind of looked at the operational side and I saw, hey, there's a big gap here because that model in general, a lot of people are operating, they're fulfilling the work. I can come in from the marketing side, build a brand quickly, and then I'll kind of figure out the whole operational aspect of it. So you can go as big or as small when it comes to being a visionary. And then I looked at the risk associated with it. And I said, well, the upside here is it does really well. The downside here is it flops, and then I just go back to doing nothing. But we ended up doing well to the point where I had to basically offload it because it was interrupting my actual day-to-day, business. But we taught her how to think now, how to kind of approach business. But I think the main message I would convey is communication is the main thing. And you have to listen to inputs. And if you're actively out there in any endeavor that you're doing, I would just say you have to have the confidence to believe in yourself and believe in something. And it's just like anything else with leadership. It's your job then to convey, and something you mentioned in one of the previous first episodes that I'm a big believer in is you have to inspire those around you. Yeah. Because if you can't, it was in a highlights video we actually released. I'm going to get the wording wrong here, but you have to tell the story so well that you get other people to get excited about it. And so sometimes it's not about the idea itself. It's about your excitement, your commitment, and how you convey that level. And then the final piece I'll say is that, and this leads a lot, I think, in leadership in general, like you have to be willing to have the tough conversations with not only yourself, but also those around you. So when we started our network of Industry Sage Media, we knew that was phase one, and we knew our model might work, it might not work. We've pivoted the model a lot, and that you have to be able to do that. Just like in the organizations, you have to be willing to look at the data and say this is working or it's not working, or the data points this way, but I still believe in my vision and I'm going to execute wholeheartedly in another.
Yeah.
And just like now, we're going through this again, where the phase two, we just launched industry stage recruiting, doing recruiting, helping a lot of manufacturing companies. And our vision for that, just to kind of show how simple this can be, is we looked at the market and we saw an inefficiency. And that inefficiency was a lot of the recruiting agencies out there are just resume mills. They're just providing quick resumes to companies. We looked at it and said our advantage is that I have previous in-house recruiting experience. I understand what a good fit candidate looks like. I understand those processes. That's the message. That's the story. That's the value that we can bring to the market. Mm-hmm. So we have this vision. Now it's on me to communicate that vision and take those steps. But a lot of it comes down to communication.
Yeah. You got me thinking too, the other thing we should point out, and everybody can use this in any level of operational thinking. You can be in a big company, you could be running a function, you could be an entrepreneur like you. But we should all acknowledge this. One is inefficiencies, one is opportunity in the market. But if you think about the big things that have happened, and all of them, you start out with Apple, just the way Apple has progressed as a company and the products they brought to market. But the one that really blows me away has been Uber, right? And what I'm getting at there is Apple, from its starting with the computers to the iPods, which became the cell phone, the iPhone, then the iWatch. And now if you think of Uber, they took over the taxi cab industry, right? And they did it by just changing a business model, right? They didn't bring a particular technology to the market. And really, Apple didn't either. They've always been great at packaging their technology, but the technology of a cell phone existed. There were leaders, Motorola, Nokia, Samsung, all these companies were leading way ahead of Apple in phones. So they didn't invent the technology. They packaged it up, but they brought a different business model. And the business model was apps, right?
Yeah.
And in Uber, the business model was, well, let people just use cars they have in their driveway, so you don't ever have to have an asset with cars and taxis and infrastructure. And then we'll just let people use their phones and the navigation apps, and we'll just write a little app to link the people that want to ride to the person that's got the car. And it changed the whole business model of doing a taxi ride. So it's not always product innovation that's the great visionary story. A lot of times it's just how you do the business model that is the innovation. And any of us can do that. That's the key. You don't have to be this brilliant visionary to do that. It's just
anybody can do it.
Anybody can do it, and you got to believe you can do it because it's been done time and time again. So business model thinking. And the other B word I think we throw out is you should always be looking for some form of a breakthrough, right?
Yeah.
And when you're developing your function or you're moving your company forward, you've got your vision, but between vision and your actions that are going on a day-to-day basis, what you want to look for is how can we come up with breakthroughs of performance? How do we get way ahead? And that's visionary thinking in and of itself. How do we break our model? And that's back to these business models. What business model are you using in that function? How can we change it dramatically to give us a breakthrough in performance? And that's the whole thinking I think people could internalize and try to adapt for themselves in a visionary way.
Yeah, and I love that point. And to add to that, one of the things that I've probably learned the most, from the entrepreneurial visionary side of things is that the breakthroughs are great. That's what people need to look for. But you also have to constantly just be thinking. We go back to the quality and excellence. It's like, how can I make this better? How can I try something different? I don't have to reinvent the whole physical product, but how can I make this different? But you also have to be aware of what I would call like the false positives. So I'll give you an example is in the recruiting business that we're doing, we have our metrics of, what our breakthroughs will technically be. But we went to market pretty quick, and we have some successes. And if we let that dictate the strategy, we don't know what that could look like down the road, because it wasn't that's not the indicators that we're actually looking for.
Yeah.
So you have to understand what data you're looking for and kind of be able to adjust for those.
Yep.
And I'll kind of share a funny story here to end this about being a visionary. I think of this every single time. Any of you listening that have kids, you can relate to this. When you go to Starbucks, if you have kids, you're not walking out of there without a cake pop or without them asking for a cake pop. And that, to me, I'm always blown away by the visionary that somebody had to say, you know what? These things are messy. Moms aren't going to let the kids, or dads aren't going to let the kids buy a piece of cake, but let's just ball it up and throw a stick in it and call it a cake pop and charge them 4 times the normal price.
Well, and there's another visionary story with Schultz and how he came up with the whole Starbucks, right? He said let's charge 2 to 3 times what people pay for a cup of coffee, but let's make it an experience that feels phenomenal, right? That they changed drinking coffee into an experience, not just the coffee, right? Yes, you could say the coffee's better, if you will, maybe, but the bottom line is he changed that business model with visionary thinking.
Yeah.
And now he learned it from the Italians when he was on vacation, but that was pretty good to bring it back to the U.S. And now today there's Starbucks in Italy, so it's kind of funny.
Yeah, but I think that's the perfect example, though, and the way to wrap this up is that I think, a lot of people, it's a big topic, it's a big word. I think that people probably think, depending on where they're at in their career, they might think this might not affect me, or it's not my, but even in the day-to-day processes that you're doing, it all just starts by asking simple questions, not thinking, don't limit your thoughts. Don't have, nothing is too small or too big, because it compounds quickly.
I think you gave us the takeaway today. Everybody needs to search for their cake pop moment.
Yes, there you go.
And you brought it. That is perfect.
There we go.
That's
cake
perfect.
pop moment. We're gonna trademark that.
Try to find those cake pop moments, and that's visionary thinking.
There we go. Awesome. We appreciate the insights here, Jack. Great conversation today. Hopefully everyone listened took away a nugget. And we'll be back with the next episode with another great topic.
Take care, everybody. Go lead.